why did we do this? Why did we spend the energy and resource on our side to be able to build an incrementality platform here at CTC to be able to offer? So first and primarily, incrementality testing through causal geo-holdout experiments is the gold standard of measurement. That's what we believe. I think there's consensus across the space that the gold standard in marketing measurement is incrementality testing.
This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Mercury. Here at Common Thread Collective, we know that cash flow is everything, especially right now. That's why we always recommend that our clients use Mercury to manage their banking, capital, and cards all from one place. Mercury lets you receive funds, generate invoices, and send free international and domestic wires in US dollars. Mercury also gives you instant access to virtual credit cards and 1.5% cash back across all your spend. Plus, if you need inventory or advertising, try Mercury's founder-friendly capital. Mercury brings all the ways you use money into one product that feels extraordinary to use. Deposit $5,000 or spend $5,000 using your Mercury credit card within your first 90 days to earn $250, or do both for $500 in total rewards. Just go to mercury.com/CTC to give it a try with no minimum deposits. That's mercury.com/CTC. Mercury is a technology company, not a bank. Check show notes for details.
Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I am Luke Austin, the VP of Ecom Strategy at CTC, and I will actually be your host on today's episode, joined by two very special guests, one that you may recognize and one newcomer completely. And I'm going to set up the topic of this conversation from the start and then introduce these two gentlemen. So here it is. We have built our own incrementality tool into Statless that is now available to anyone who works with us at CTC to have access to unlimited geo holdout tests. It is now available, and this is something that we've been working on for a very long time and are very excited for this launch and what it will allow us to partner with you all in as it relates to marketing measurement at CTC. So we'll get more into why we did this, what the tool entails, what it allows us to do, and actually walking through a couple of incrementality geo holdout test results to walk through the process with you all. But before I do, I want to introduce a couple of the key gentlemen behind this rollout and what we've been working on for a long time now. So I'll kick it over first to Kwa and then to Steve Rekuc. So Kwa, over to you.
So I'm the VP of Technology at CTC, and my background actually is in finance. So I kind of was brought up in a lot of financial modeling. And so time series analysis for me is very natural, box Jenkins. And so when we started looking at geolift studies, and we do a lot of forecasting within Statless as well, I kind of felt like, oh, this is kind of a domain that I was really interested in. So I jumped in and looked at the research. The research is really interesting. And I think like for people that are like really numbers happy and want to get into marketing, it's something that everyone should read. And then when I saw kind of like the other geolift studies, like I just felt like there's something that we could make and contribute to the marketplace.
Awesome. Steve?
Yeah, and I'm Steve Rekuc, Director of Data at Common Thread Collective. I help build some of the models that our brands use that are utilized in Statless. I also look at a lot of the macroeconomic data, some of the survey data for the DTCCI and direct to consumer confidence index, that is, and also contribute to D2C index that we publish weekly versions of and monthly versions of. And I have a background more in mechanical engineering and took statistical testing in grad school and then looked at it for testing out quality control purposes, as well as using it more in engineering specs. But it makes sense very much to utilize it in this manner in like geo-testing. So it was always a strong interest, and I felt like we could do a really good job with it. So glad to see that we've taken this on.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that leads naturally into the question of why did we do this? Why did we spend the energy and resource on our side to be able to build an incrementality platform here at CTC to be able to offer? So first and primarily, incrementality testing through causal geo-holdout experiments is the gold standard of measurement. That's what we believe. I think there's consensus across the space that the gold standard in marketing measurement is incrementality testing. There are sort of 3 different tiers as it relates to marketing measurement and how people can think about doing that. First is surveys and third-party data to sort of understand what relationships might exist in certain channels contributing to the business outcome. Second tier would be more related to MTAs and attribution models, attempting to apply some fractional credit on top of historical data. But incrementality testing is the gold standard because it is setting up an experiment at a specific point in time that has a high confidence output that we can say, this test was run, this is our confidence in this result being the case, and then making the budget allocation decisions accordingly from that point. So we built the tool for that reason. Incrementality is the gold standard measurement. That said, the solutions that currently exist in the market through the platforms that many of us know and are probably well familiar with cost $10,000 a month plus, longer term agreements in most cases, and are cost prohibitive for a number of brands needing to participate in the gold standard of measurement. So we believe that everyone needs to be using geo-holdout testing. And so we create a solution to be able to allow for that with high confidence output that is not cost prohibitive at that same level. The reason we were able to do this, which I think could be a question that naturally follows, is that one, we have our own proprietary business planning and insights tool called Statless. So Qua, as a VP of technology, oversees Statless and all the functions there, and the data integrations to all the platforms. So we have the data already and it exists within this platform. And then Steve's role as the director of data is looking at all that data across our data set and the broader market trends, as well as doing the modeling on behalf of individual brands. So we're already looking at that data and doing our forecasting and planning against it. In addition to that, we have access to hundreds of incrementality tests and geo-holdout tests from other brands and other platforms that we've, over the course of the recent years, been able to see those insights, been able to see the trends, and also see what works well, what doesn't, to identify things to improve upon and build our tool off of. And then the third and final thing, which is that our growth strategists at CTC are responsible for the FP&A, budget allocation, and target setting across channels, and then tracking against that pacing to forecast and the opportunity identification. Marketing measurement is already naturally a part of the responsibility that we're taking on as growth strategists at CTC and partnering with the brands that we do. And naturally, incrementality has become a big part of those conversations over the past couple of years. So we haven't needed to build out additional teams or units that are taking this on because we're already involved in those conversations. We already have our own tool. We already have all the data and we already have the people engaging in those conversations. So naturally, us being able to offer a tool that gives high confidence results that is included as a part of working with CTC was the thing that we were always after related to this conversation. So what we want to do from here is walk through our tool in the context of a recent test output and speak to some of the areas. But before we do jump into that, Qua, Steve, from either of you, is there anything else that you'd want to add as it relates to the why or the how in terms of why we built this tool and how we got here, some of the impetus to frame it up before getting into the tool and the test results specifically?
Well, I think us building our own tool also allows us to kind of get under the hood in the process, because if we're in charge of a brand and growth strategy for that brand, we're responsible for acting on the knowledge that we have. So if a test winds up with an erroneous result and then we apply that doesn't look really good for us, and that's bad for our brands. So we'd really like to understand what's going on and what could negatively impact test results that we might not be able to get under the hood of if we can't look into those details and see what's going on in the test. We might be acting on erroneous test results in a bad way. And we'd like to avoid that. And we'd like to therefore know what's going on. So building our own and knowing what's going on gives us a little bit more direct control on the process.
Trusted by more than 200,000 startups, small businesses, and e-commerce companies, plus many of our clients here at CTC, Mercury gives you the ability to manage your banking, capital, and cards all from one place. E-commerce Playbook podcast listeners get $250 by depositing $5,000 or spending $5,000 using the Mercury credit card within your first 90 days, or do both for $500 at mercury.com/CTC. Mercury is a technology company, not a bank. Check show notes for details.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what connected to that, what we've built into Statless is the ability to see the efficiency or the IOAS from each of the platforms based on the results of these incrementality studies. So loading in incrementality factors for each of the channels and then viewing channel performance based on the results of incrementality tests. So we have that within Statless. That's primarily how we view, and that's primarily how we view and assess the performance of each of the marketing channels. Steve, to your point, we're loading in those incrementality factors. We're looking at the channel performance against those. And so we want to be very confident in those results and be very involved in the process as it relates to arriving at those incrementality factors and each of the results connected to them. And I think the other thing we saw is that there's the relationship between geo holdout tests impact on each of the different revenue definitions, which we'll walk through here soon. So on not just your total D2C revenue, but the new customer revenue from D2C, returning customer revenue from D2C, and then the halo effect on Amazon. Each of those have a relationship to the media spend that's important to define, measure against, and then take into the consideration when setting targets as well. And then the other thing we were talking briefly before we started the episode, and Kwa, I'm curious if you could jump in with a bit more insight that you had shared earlier, which is you've done a lot of digging, as we all have, into this space over the recent years as it relates to incrementality testing. You've seen some of the other platforms and results that exist on them. What were some of the things that you have identified over that course of time that really led you to identify, these are things we need to improve upon and that we could improve upon in building our own tool?
Yeah, so my journey into incrementality product is a little bit different than I think yours and Steve. So I kind of like did my own research, and we were kind of studying everything for like a couple months. I had a couple other like statisticians. We looked at it from a very statistical standpoint. Like, okay, like how do we properly run a test? And from if you could control the test, if you can control like kind of like the model and a lot of the inputs, then you could run a really good test. But if someone kind of just gives you data and you have to make something out of it, then it's very hard to run tests. And that's when you really need to advance like econometrics. And so the viewpoint that I thought that we can do is that we're just going to try to create really clean tests. And then we're going to have a really high confidence level in those tests versus like someone runs those tests in a sloppy way and we have to kind of go in and fix it. And I don't know if we even have the tools to do that. But what we can do is we can control the tests. Like we could like, okay, you should do this and do that and like set up your channels this way. And so like, I think that is kind of our advantage. And I didn't really think about it until we started working together more. I was like, hey, actually, like when you approach this from like a marketing standpoint, there's a lot of inputs that's really valuable. And another thing is like from a statistician, like we just kind of give you what the results are and it's up to you to do whatever you want with it. But from C2C standpoint, it's like, okay, well, if the results don't match or like these recommendations don't work out, they're responsible for it, right? Yeah. So that like change of responsibility is a really big deal compared to like how other firms run things. So I think, it just has a ton of value in terms of like taking on the full responsibility in terms of like study to action. And I don't think there's anything like that.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, which is with most of you listening are probably familiar with. Every month we build out a forecast and we say, this is the target that we're going to execute against. We track against it every day. And our goal is to be plus or minus 10% within that forecast. And we're putting ourselves on the hook for that outcome for you all. And so, it's a great point, Quad, which is incrementality being the core of how we're setting budget allocations and targets and doing the marketing measurement. It's then connecting to the forecast that we're putting ourselves on the line for and saying, this is what we're going to go after and get. And so the output of the test isn't a data point that sort of lives somewhere. It gets directly integrated into the business forecast and business plan that gets actioned against right when we get a high confidence test result. So I think it's a great point. All right.
Well, in a way too, the advantage that we have too is that a lot of the data sits in Statless already. Like Quaz built an excellent tool where we already have the data for our brands ready to use for this. Yes. So it makes it an easier step for us to go in and do this rather than some third party that requires more integrations.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, not only that, it's cleaned already. So like we exclude certain channels that you might not have thought of. We like tweak the like attribution definitions. You might like even exclude certain campaigns that would have thrown off the data. Like there's all these things that we kind of pre-clean that really make this thing a lot easier. Like that like if you were coming in fresh and had to like just were given data, you don't really know like, hey, is this point valid? Was there something that I should throw out? And just handle that is just such a big lift for like from a statistics standpoint.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. And it's worth noting too, we've built in the functionality to import past incrementality tests into our tool. So for brands that have run incrementality tests with another platform or another tool prior to working with us, or even if they don't work with us, we're able to upload those results so that we can have all the incrementality results live within StatList, all of them connect to the media channels and the forecast. And to the point earlier that we were discussing, be able to assess the confidence of past tests that were maybe not even run with our platform to assess whether it's a high confidence output or whether we should rerun that channel or tactic again, but have everything in one place and really be able to say, okay, do we have enough contents to, again, put our sign off on this and bring it into the business forecast, or is there something that should be retested to make sure we're fully confident in being able to sign up for it? So let's jump into the tool without further ado. So what we'll have up here for those of you viewing this on YouTube or through some visual channel is a walkthrough of the studies tool and the geo holdout portion of the studies tool within StatList. We'll be walking through each section of it, and it's in the context of one of the results for one of our brands that we have run recently. For those of you just listening, we'll try to describe with as many adjectives as possible to give the idea of what we're walking through. But the first screen here that we have up is a project progress overview. So it shows 5 steps in the geo holdout test design. So the first step is getting recommendations on the market selection for the test. The next is selecting the test conditions. The third is setting the study start date. The fourth step is running the study. And then the fifth step is finalizing and ending the test. So we're going to walk through each of those 5 steps sequentially, how they exist in our tool, and then share context on what the methodology and approach is that is leading to each of those. So we're going to start first here with the recommendations or the market selection phase of the process. So Steve, Qual, we'll kind of do open quorum here. Whoever wants to jump in, give us some context on the recommendations, market selection stage, step 1 here. What is going on in the tool?
So the method of incrementality that we use is called synthetic controls. And so what this is doing is it's trying to set up groups of states that are going to be good for synthetic controls. So if you select, like if you just select 4 random states and you run a study, later when you need to find another 4 group of states to kind of compare that against to have like a control group, it might be difficult if you select the wrong states, right? So what this does is it goes through and gives you a kind of like what was the term? So it kind of models out like, okay, if I select these 4 states, what are kind of like potential things that could happen? What are kind of best fits that could occur given the data that I fed into it? So, and then it gives you kind of like a confidence level, and then it ranks it. So like it ranks it by, so the first 2 here are the top kind of recommendations and rankings depending on effect size. So, and the effect size determines your budget. So like if it determines, okay, you're going to have to do like a 10% lift with these 10 states, which is a 10% effect size. You can kind of look in like, okay, how much did I spend in these states? And then if I were to do a holdout, what would be the cost? And that kind of gives you the budget. And it also kind of recommends how long to run the study for. And then as you scroll down, it should get worse and worse. But sometimes you might want to like pick a market rank number 3. Like it's the difference might not be that much where you just always pick the first ranked market. There's some other things in consideration. And the other thing that the software isn't able to do is look at charts. So like, that's why we have the charts in here. It's like it might be like one, but you'll see like, actually like, like this doesn't really make sense when you look at the chart. Like it's not stable, or like this data should be thrown out because it's whatever information I know about the market. So I think it's always important to look at.
What we're doing with the synthetic control is trying to find a representation, states that represent your overall performance, your nationwide performance, by selecting a subset and weighting the different states in that subset so that they're very representative of what's going on in the overall market.
Yes. And I think we all probably have differing levels of understanding as it relates to what the incrementality and geo holdout testing is, but there are primarily two types of tests as it relates to incrementality testing that brands will run. One, which is just a straight holdout test, which is you're going to run media only in a group of, let's call it 5 states that are identified based on the market selection and synthetic control. That's typically good for lower spending or new ad channels where you're launching a media buy on TV. And so you're going to do it in 5 to 7 states first, see the impact with the lower budget based on the market selection, and then you can grow from there to a national buy. The other test type is an inverse holdout test. This is the most common of what most brands want to do, which is the market selection process occurs, identified based on the synthetic control, a group of, let's call it 5 states that are representative of the total business. And then those states are excluded from the media. So you run media in the 45 states, you don't run it in the 5 states, and you see the negative impact on revenue by withholding media from those states. So holdout testing, inverse holdout testing, but it's all based around this process of identifying a group of markets that's going to be representative of how your overall revenue for your business moves, and then being able to affect the media spend within those markets to see what the impact is on either increased revenue or drop in revenue if you're pulling back spend. So the market selection process here is identifying the group of states that will be best based on representation of your business, as well as budget constraints and what you're able to do to be able to get a high confidence read in structuring the test. I think another point that is worth making here is what's noted here at the top of the test, which is that this is looking at discounted sales. So we can look at different revenue definitions. Doesn't make a huge impact, but specifically this is looking at first time order, so first time revenue. Steve or Kwa, whoever wants to jump in, can you give more insight on how we look at different revenue definitions, first time revenue, total revenue, returning revenue, and why we may pick to design a test around first time customer revenue rather than total customer revenue?
Well, in this particular case, and in many brands' case, you're actually using ad spend to drive new customer sales. You're not doing it hopefully not doing it too much on the returning customer side. And this particular brand has a good amount of LTV. So we were to look at total sales, it kind of gets a little bit more lost in the noise. You're going to see a much stronger signal of what that ad spend is doing against new customers, first time orders. And that's why in this particular case, we're focusing on this. And we'll do that for a lot of brands where you're running that campaign primarily to new customers. We're going to look at the impact on new customers, and that's going to be what we're going to base our selection on and what we're going to be trying to hit in terms of finding statistical significance in measuring that effect.
Yeah. And it's worth noting for this test, this was a Facebook acquisition test. So we were measuring the incremental impact of the acquisition or new customer oriented campaigns within Meta. So the test was then designed against looking at first time customer revenue from Shopify and each of the markets to be able to design that test on Meta acquisition. But we look at different revenue definitions and structuring an incrementality test to determine the effect of Meta retention campaigns, for example, right? And there would be different things considered there. So market selection, this is the recommendation stage, and the tool that we've built allows us to see different market selections. But what we're doing in partnering together with the brands that we're working on incrementality is Steve and Kwa's insight, and the data team's insight comes through in terms of here's the recommended market and test design that we should move forward with. We're making that recommendation based on the different things that we're seeing in the tool and the confidence level, and then partnering and standing up the test together. Moving on to the next step, which is the recommendation outputs. We don't spend too much time here, but Kwa, is there anything worth pulling up here in terms of the recommendation outputs and sort of visualizing what to expect from one of these tests?
Yeah. So the thing I look at here is the power curve. So the dual lift power curve gives you kind of a model on like how the effect size will change with an investment. So like if I were to spend at what point, so I would expect to see an effect starting around 40K. And these numbers aren't exact because we know that there's assumptions that might not come true, which we correct for later. But like at some point, 40K to 80K, you go from a 10% to a 20% effect size. And so like this is kind of valuable if you're running the type of test. So like if you're running a holdout versus a reverse holdout, you kind of want to look at this to see, okay, if I were to run a reverse holdout, am I going to be able to get the desired effect I want? So I usually just kind of take a quick look at this to make sure like it doesn't show anything weird.
Yeah, that's great. So we can see this for each of the different market selection recommendations and kind of see what the power curve looks like. But again, to be able to have confidence that we're going to be able to spend enough within that channel and tactic over that time period to get a high confidence read on the test output. Because what we don't want to do is we're trying to get an understanding in most cases of what is the incrementality of this channel as it currently stands, right? So we don't want to set up a test and then have to double spend within that channel for the duration of the test to determine the incrementality, knowing that we're going to pull back the spend after, right? We need to be representative of the budget that we're planning to continue at, or at least within that range. And so this allows us to make sure that we have enough budget to get the read at the current levels. Step 3, location selection. So we've identified by this point what the recommended market outputs are based on market selection and then the recommendation from the team. Made sure budget consideration is going to be strong enough based on the power curve. And then the location selection step here, what else are we looking for and determining within this step?
So this is where you would make your selection, and that's probably already decided by looking at the previous steps. The thing here is figure out your budget. So what we do different compared to, I think, other platforms or like other people that normally model it is we don't make an assumption on assumption on what is the expected ROS going into the model. That is decided in this step. So this is because that's a really big determinant in your budget allocation. So if you think that the IROS is the ROS for Facebook acquisition is like 2, that drastically changes your expected budget, right? Versus anything is 0.5. So by making this step, I think you get a much more accurate budget allocation. And that's probably the main thing to look at here. Whether you want to do a holdout or reverse holdout and what budget you're expecting to spend.
Yes. I think this is a really important point actually, which is in designing these tests to understand. So the tests are designed based on an assumption around the revenue impact that needs to be seen. So what we're looking at is how much revenue impact do we need to see to have a high confidence read on this test output. Then what we need to do is back into, okay, how much budget do I need within this channel and tactic to be able to realize that level of revenue impact? That progression, revenue impact to the budget, is really important because we have to assume in there that some level of actual efficiency from the channel and tactic, right? Quad, you said it, like if we need $80,000 of revenue impact and we think the channel performs at a 3x, we don't have to spend that much money. But if the channel actually performs at a 0.8x, we're gonna have to spend a lot more to be able to see that revenue impact. And so this is something that over the course of some time now, we've been aggregating the results from incrementality tests from various platforms and various brands to create incrementality starting points or benchmarks that we use in this process. And so we're able to say, based on hundreds of tests that we've seen from other brands and the results of those, a starting point for Facebook Meta acquisition on a 7-day click basis, 120% incrementality is a starting point that we're confident in. We know that Meta 7-day click acquisition is not going to be a 3x incremental ROAS in most cases, right? And there's always brands on all sides of that data set, but we also know it's likely not going to be a 0.5. And so we use a starting point incrementality benchmark based on a larger data set. In this case, Meta acquisition, 7-day click at 120% incrementality factor, which is saying Meta underreports its true incremental impact. And then we're using that to do the equation of how much revenue impact do we need to see back into the budget. So we use the incrementality benchmarks or starting point factors from the data set of brands that we have aggregated to be able to get to the budget allocation necessary. And that just gives us a higher confidence that the test we're designing is going to be a test result that is going to work out in the end, rather than getting into the test and saying, all right, we think we need to spend $25,000 on this incrementality test in these states. We get to the end of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is. Well, no, we need to keep spending more. And actually you need to spend $50,000 for that test, not $25,000. We want to mitigate any of that to have a really high confidence in the necessary budget allocation. Okay. And then validation. This is, now we have everything set up, market selected, budget allocated, the timeline for the test. The step here is that the exclusions for those markets need to be placed within the platform. And so we've added this validation step within the tool to help us be able to see if the exclusions have been applied to the necessary campaigns or if there are any gaps. So we've done the market selection. We're going to see if the regions have been excluded or not from the specific campaign that they need to be. In this case, this test is completed. And so what it's showing is there's no regions excluded from these campaigns. If the test was running, it would say these are the regions that were excluded. We're good to go. This test is concluded. We've added back in those DMAs, so we'd expect nothing to be excluded. This just allows us to be able to see and be clear that, yes, we have excluded the right regions. There's no straggler campaigns that are not excluding the right regions that are going to muddy up the test results and give us that validation in the process. And then landing the plane here with the end output, which is the result of the test. We've set up the test. We've run the test for a number of weeks. So at this point, when can we end the test? And what is the data that we're looking at in determining when a test result is completed and that the test was a strong output?
So you're looking for stability. So if you're able to go in and look at the test every day, then you'll notice that, hey, like it's stabilizing. The B values have reached a certain point. If you're not looking at the test every day, then you would just go with the recommendation. So if the recommendation was 21 days, you would look at 21 days. Okay, it looks pretty good. Probably what we should add as a feature is to kind of look to see how the results have changed over time, so that we can see if it has stabilized. That's just talking through it. That seems like something no-brainer to add. But that's what you would do. You want to know that it's stabilized. You want to know that you've reached your effect threshold, and hopefully you have some decent p-values. And then you look through the charts to see like if it makes sense.
Great. So let's talk through some of the specifics of this test result for the brand that we will leave unnamed, but we can walk through some of the specific data. So this test is concluded. It was a result that we have high confidence in. Let's talk through some of the specific data points as a result of the test. What are we looking at that gives us high confidence in the test output, and what was the result of the test?
First, we were running this selecting based upon new customers, and it's a meta acquisition campaign. So we're first looking at that new customer effect. And the first thing that we see is a p-value of 0.01, meaning we have 99% confidence that this account that we're testing does have a positive effect, that this is for sure doing something good. It's definitely an incremental channel. Next, we're scrolling down and we're looking at the IOAS that we measure. And this is measured by the amount of revenue loss. In this particular case, we were doing that inverse geolift that you were talking about, Luke. We're turning off channels in these states. So we should see a loss in revenue in those states. And based upon that, we also estimate an incremental spend that would have occurred in those states had we kind of continued spending. So we're able to come up with an IOAS, an estimated IOAS for what we would have had in revenue and in spend for that state had we left this media on.
Yeah, that's great. So that is an impact on the new customer revenue as measured in Shopify at the conclusion of this test. We have really high confidence. What we're also then looking at is what was the effect in withholding that spend on returning customer revenue, and then on total revenue, so combined new and returning for D2C, and then also looking at the Amazon effect, the halo effect on Amazon revenue, and looking at each of those things to see if there's a relationship to each one of them. In the case of this test, the effect on returning customer revenue is a p-value of 0.34. So that is not high confidence enough for us to be able to say that withholding meta acquisition spend had a significant impact on the returning customer revenue. That is what we would expect from a meta acquisition oriented campaign if the exclusions are set up right and the test is dialed in. So that's actually a good sign in this case, right? We don't have a read on returning revenue, so they are focused on new customer revenue. And it's why looking at the new customer revenue in addition to the total revenue is so important, because we do have a strong enough read on total revenue. It's a p-value of 0.08, but the new customer revenue is a 0.01. It's much stronger when we pull out the returning customer revenue effect from it. That said, we're looking at the total fully loaded IOAS impact of this channel or tactic on D2C plus Amazon to get to a confidence of dollar into this specific channel and tactic. What can I expect the IOAS to be on the business as a whole? So that's what we have here visualized in this chart is a fully loaded total effect IOAS. Platform ROAS is on the far left here. And then we see the additional impact from the new customer read from Shopify, the returning customer revenue impact, and then the Amazon halo effect to be the total effect of the channel on the full business. And so we can slice it different ways to be able to say, okay, the incremental ROAS on new customer revenue for D2C compared to the platform ROAS, or we can look at the fully loaded number that takes into account total revenue as well as the Amazon to be able to give the clearest picture of, I put $1 in this channel based on the result of this incrementality test. What can I expect the result to be of that media spend relative to what the platform is claiming the impact was and what the efficiency of the test was. And then scrolling down here, we have some other visuals and data points as it relates to the results of the test. Well, I don't know if you'd want to jump in and highlight anything as it relates to some of these charts below the test results that are worth highlighting and that we look for at the conclusion of a test.
Yeah, you want to just validate that the spend is what you expected. So if you see there like it didn't spend up in those periods is what you want, and then you want to in the next graph. Like you would hope to see, I mean, it's really hard to see, but you would hope to see that there's some effect on the customer revenue within ones that you withheld spend on. But like I said, it is really hard to eyeball that. But in some cases, you're going to see it. The other thing you're looking for is like in this case here, where there was a spike. So these are non-control states. There's a spike in spend. So you might want to, so that might be something like, okay, so why didn't maybe there's a sale or something. And so you would take that into account as well like when you look through the charts. So there is no spend there. And you see like in this one, the top line, there's kind of spikes in revenue that kind of correlate to the spikes of spend where there's nothing in the test state. So like there is going to be a pretty strong signal here. I'm just looking at the charts. And then this is just something like I kind of like want to see that they're like the kind of like visualize what the states were. And like see if there's anything that might be like too close to each other. So that's what I would look here. And then if you scroll over, like for example, Texas, you kind of look at the different states. So like Texas, can you scroll up? So Texas, like effect size is minus 10%. And then if you look at Florida, let's go over Florida. So the effect size here was like 16%. And so like, I just kind of look at through like, okay, where kind of the different effect sizes, was there one state that really dominated? And then, like there's nothing that we could really do with it, but it would affect your kind of like post-analysis. Okay, like there's just like, we saw really strong signal, but all of it came from this one really big state. And so that would kind of put a little bit deeper on the study. But these are things that you would kind of like a checklist of things you look at.
Great.
Yeah. And even as the test is progressing, those charts are awesome. So when you're able to look at the holdout states, the states where we were supposed to turn off spend, you should be able to see them have no spend continue. That something weird didn't happen, that all of a sudden they got turned back on by somebody. So it's great as you're keeping track of this campaign and checking back in, or keeping track of this test and checking back in, that you see that those lines make sense throughout the time period, not just at the end of the test.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So that's the process. That's the thought work that has gone into building the tool and standing up the test and getting the results. The so what of all of this is at the end of this test, what we're able to see is the platform meta acquisition was claiming a 1.21 7-day click ROAS. After adding in the incrementality results for new customer revenue, total revenue, and then the Amazon halo effect, the total fully loaded IROAS result based on the test was closer to a 1.33, 1.34. So the meta platform on a 7-day click basis for this tactic was underreporting its impact to the broader business when taking into account the revenue as well as the Amazon halo effect, which would then, as an action, potentially lead to a decision to be able to invest more in this channel to drive more overall revenue. If we were looking at the 1.21 and thinking, okay, this is what the efficiency is, actually there's additional halo impact from this channel on the broader business, we're willing to invest more. And the test results that we've seen go both ways in at very different levels. And so it's very important that we love using incrementality starting points and benchmarks, but getting the results for your brand specifically is paramount, because the results that we're seeing from these tests are very disparate in terms of what the true incremental impact is of each of these channels versus what the platform is reporting. And the budget allocation decisions, the target setting and media planning decisions that follow are really consequential, which is why we've built this tool at CTC to be able to offer on behalf of our clients so that anyone who works with CTC has access to unlimited geo holdout tests starting now. So I think that covers everything we were planning to walk through today. Kwa, Steve, anything else to add before we wrap things up?
Just looking through these tests for, I don't know, like almost a year now, maybe almost, and working with a lot of other statisticians, I think anyone that tells you that I have 100% confidence in this study after you run it one time, there is probably lying to you. And there's just so much leeway in terms of how you calculate things, in terms of how you model things, in terms of how you set up the data. And I think I just don't know how you could have confidence if you don't have total control of the data. And so even if we were to give the test to someone else to run, we'll just never have that much confidence into it versus running it ourselves.
Yeah. And I think they're really dependent upon the time and the spend that you run it at and the other things that are going on with your brand. So it's very much how your brand fits into using that panel at this particular time.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it at that. To anyone who made it to the end of this episode, more power to you. Thanks for hanging with us. Talk soon.
Bye.